are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, your host for Locked On Seahawks. Joining me as always, my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. Last week, we thought the Seahawks hit rock bottom. It turns out that they weren't quite to the bottom yet. And yesterday, even without Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins, the Cardinals were able to come into Lumen Field and get a 23-13 commanding victory that honestly didn't even feel that close. The Seahawks falling to 3-7 for the first time since Jim Mora was on the sidelines in 2009. Rob and I will be breaking down this latest ugly defeat, the one that pretty much put the nail into the Seahawks playoff coffin. We'll be answering your mailbag questions and, of course, breaking down some unfortunate injuries coming out of this game. Thanks for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. Now for your lead story here on Locked On Seahawks. As if the Seahawks needed an exclamation point on top of what was already a dreadful Sunday after losing to the Cardinals at Lumen Field, the team lost one of its most promising young players to what looks to be a season-ending knee injury. After yesterday's game, Coach Pete Carroll told the media that Tre Brown suffered a patella tendon injury. Don't know if it's exactly the same as the one that tight end Will Dissly suffered a few years back, but this is one of the most serious injuries that an NFL player can suffer. Not a high rate of success coming back compared to some other injuries. So we don't know yet, Rob, how serious this is, but unfortunately, this is not going to be the first time that I'm going to do this on today's show. But Pete Carroll's exchange with the media today, talking about Brown's injury, was pretty darn bizarre. At first, it was like he was trying to be guarded. Maybe he was told you can't say anything about this injury. He'd been asked a couple of times throughout the day on different interviews for an update on Brown, and he said, "Oh, there's no update." But then he finished up the sentence saying that he had to figure out what to do before he had his operation, something along those lines. And that kind of caught everybody on the Zoom call's attention. Like, wait. Did you just say that he needs an operation? And so another reporter asked for clarification, and Carroll kind of looked like he didn't really want to delve into that, and then kind of realized, wait a second, I said something I didn't plan on saying in that earlier question. So he had to admit, yes, surgery looks imminent, and that most likely means that Tre Brown's season is over. It's an unfortunate hit for Seattle's defense because that secondary has been so much better since Tre Brown took over as the starting left cornerback.
Yeah, that, like you said, Corbin, I mean, basically it's adding injury to insult, instead of the other way around. Tre Brown has been one of Seattle's better, defensive players over the last month or so. If you were looking for the silver lining to all of these dark clouds with how the Seahawks have been playing, then Tre Brown, I think, would be chief among them. And so the likelihood that this is a very, very serious injury, patella tendon can be a year-long injury. It can be more than that, as you referenced. It remains to be seen just how serious this particular injury is. If it's complete rupture, then we could be talking about, not only the rest of this season, but deep into next season as well. And considering the fact that it's a cornerback and quick twitch, change of direction, straight line speed, those are all things that are absolutely critical, of course, to that position, then this, does not bode very well for Tre Brown. Obviously, very, very serious injury for him. And, I think there's a lot of football fans out there who are more familiar with injuries like, say, an ACL and things like that. Fortunately, medical technology has improved to the point now where if you tear an ACL, then the reconstructive surgeries on that usually is a 8 to 10 month process, and the player often comes back basically as good as new a year later. That may not be the case here. So really, really heartbreaking news for the young player. And then also for the Seahawks. Now, if we were going to try to add some positive to it, then I thought that the play of Sidney Jones was encouraging. The fact that Bless Austin got a little bit of time out there. The Seahawks made a trade previously to brought in John Reed from the Houston Texans previously as well. And so because of that, I do think that the depth of the cornerback position is a little bit better than it might suggest. But at the same time, if you're not getting home in the pass rush, and if the Seattle's inability to create any type of consistent turnovers other than Quandre Diggs in the secondary, then yeah, this is a dark day in Seattle.
There's no question about it. And as soon as the injury happened, the first thing that came to my mind is that's either an ACL injury or it's a patellar tendon injury, because you could just see Tre Brown crumple. He was in coverage. This was early in the second quarter. He was defending AJ Green, who, by the way, kind of turned back the clock a little bit in this game. Looked like 2013 edition of AJ Green, high point in the football, but it was a vertical route. Brown was trying to turn to make a play in the football, and he ended up tripping over his own feet. He crumpled, had his left leg get tucked under him kind of awkwardly. So initially I thought maybe that's where the injury happened, but I actually think the injury happened while he was running. It looked like it was one of those cases where it was a non-contact injury and he just happened to land awkwardly when he was going to the ground. And somehow he was able to get a shoestring tackle to get AJ Green down after he made the catch. And then he rolled over. He was withering in pain. Trainers came out to look at him, and then he was able to come off the field on his own power. He was limping pretty bad to get off the field, but he didn't need help to do so. They listed him as questionable, but everybody in the press box knew, at least for this game, Tre Brown's not going to be back. And once Carroll talked about it being a patella tendon injury after the game, that pretty much was the omen everybody needed there, that this is going to be a season-ending injury, even if he's not willing to admit it right now. And so it does put the Seahawks in a bind because their secondary has been so much better since he entered the lineup when they played the Steelers in Week 6. They did get a good game from Sidney Jones. Bless Austin, I thought, had some decent reps out there. Did have one play where he stumbled. That seems to be an issue on the Lumen Field turf this year. But that's for another topic at another time. But I thought Bless Austin did some nice things out there on the outside too. So they're going to have those two. Maybe DJ Reed comes back this week. Pete Carroll was non-committal about that. They don't know where he's going to be at by the time they play in Washington next Monday. They're hoping to get him back, but if they don't, it's going to be Jones and Austin most likely as their starters. John Reed is the other option that they have. Maybe a little better depth than what they have had in previous seasons, but this is certainly a big blow to the secondary, and the Seahawks at 3-7 couldn't afford to have an injury like this hit. It's the worst of both worlds. The team's not playing well, and they lose one of the few young players they have that's really been able to play at a high level this season, with so many draft picks struggling, especially their first rounders not playing, or if they do play, like Rashad Penny getting hurt the first play of the game again. They just can't keep some of these young guys on the field. Brown has been one of those rare bright spots, and now they're not going to have him back most likely for the rest of the season. Best wishes to Trey as he recovers from this injury and whatever surgery that he needs to have in the near future, but doesn't look like he's going to be back in 2021. When we come back in the second quarter, Rob and I are going to be answering your questions in our Locked On Seahawks mailbag. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Does this sound familiar? You've got one device that lets you catch the game live, another that lets you stream your favorite shows. You're watching sports highlights on your phone, and you've got your neighbor's best friend's login for the good stuff. Well, I want to tell you about a simple way to get all the entertainment you love without the hassle, and a great way to finally get your TV together. It's called DirecTV Stream, and it brings your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before. So you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes and no need to buy another device ever again. And the best part, there's no annual contract. So get rid of the clutter and the confusion. Get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Monday edition. The Seahawks coming off a really rough game on Sunday, falling to the Cardinals 23-13. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Joining me as always, Rob Rang. Let's get to our weekly mailbag segment. A lot of questions coming from the 12s, and as you would expect, a lot of despair coming from the 12s after this game that in many ways felt like an end of an era. We'll see if that ends up being the case, but that's the type of magnitude that a loss like this, the 7th loss in 10 games so far this year, has. And that's why the fan base feels the way that it does right now. So we understand the negative questions. We know there are a lot of tough topics to touch on right now, with this being such a different season than what we've seen for the Seahawks over the past decade. So without further ado, let's get to the questions. First one coming from Cash with a K tweets, How do you guys cope with watching this team? So, Rob, you and I have a little different perspective that you watch the games on TV at home. I'm in the press box, and obviously little different ways that we view things, a little different viewing lens, so to speak.
Yeah, no question about it. And I would just say, kind of tongue in cheek, that the drinks are cheaper at home, and that's one of the ways that I'm able to cope. I mean, with all due respect to our show, I also do a show on Friday afternoons with our buddy Ian Furness on Sports Radio 950 KJR, and I'm proud to be sponsored by a local company, the Chambers Bay Distillery that makes alcohol, and literally I have a sip of Ron vodka, and it's kind of funny because that's at times what it feels like, and so I kind of say that again, tongue in cheek, but from taking it a little bit more serious. One of the things that I really enjoy, Corbin, is that I enjoy evaluating football players. And there's no question about it. The Seahawks have to do a lot of self-evaluation. There are a lot of jobs I think are going to be on the line. And for a guy like me who enjoys evaluating the college players and anticipating who might look best in the blue and green in Seattle, then that's a big part of my job. So I'm as busy as I've ever been. It may not be as much fun for most Seahawk fans, but from a talent evaluator, I mean, this is exactly what I'm looking for is who deserves to be on the Seahawks roster, not only in 2021, but in 2022 moving forward.
Fans have to understand that as a reporter, I don't watch games from a fan's perspective. I mean, I can't even do it now. This is, now being my fourth year that I have been on the beat for the Seahawks. I can't watch a college game or another NFL game and just watch it, just to enjoy watching football. I have now been programmed, and to an extent, this is maybe the one thing that kind of disappoints me about my job is that, I was just watching a little bit of the Giants and Buccaneers game, and in the back of my head, I'm thinking, okay, what am I going to write for my halftime piece? Or what are a couple of my takeaways here from this game? Oh, there's a question I need to ask the head coach. That's the way I'm now programmed. So I watch games much differently than I did before I got into this job. So, and unfortunately, I guess you could say unfortunately, some of the other reporters were saying, unfortunately, last night, you're not allowed to have open alcohol in the press box. So that would never be an option, even if I wanted to go down that road. Although the Seahawks, I can see why fans would feel like that's the best way to cure what ails them right now. I can see that. But, I try to always keep a clear lens and look at, the good and the bad. And I look at it from a reporter perspective. That's now just the way that I'm programmed. So it's a lot different than it would have been, say, 5 or 6 years ago when I'd watch NFL games and you really get your emotions tied into it. When you're a reporter, you can't let that happen because then you can't do your job. That's just the reality. Next question from Joey Eastbrook tweets, it seemed like the offense was more efficient with Geno Smith at the helm. How do the numbers shake out when evaluating third down efficiency, time of possession, etc., when comparing Wilson's pre- and post-injury games to Geno's stint? I will say this right now, Rob and I did not have a chance before the show to actually dive into these numbers, but I think you'll agree with me, Rob, that we don't need the numbers necessarily. The eye test has been there to know that the honest truth is you take out the Jaguars game, the last 5 or 6 games have all been much the same, regardless of who's been under center.
Yeah, that's been the problem. Again, Geno Smith, I think, is deservedly a backup quarterback, a solid backup quarterback at that, but still not among the 32 best quarterbacks in all of the NFL, and therefore isn't a starter. Russell Wilson, for so much of his career, has been among the 10 best quarterbacks in the entire, on the entire planet, and yet the play has been horrific. Certainly of these last 2 weeks, of Russell Wilson coming back with the right middle finger injury, but even before that, some of the decisions, some of the throws, frankly, we just have not seen the pinpoint accuracy, the velocity, the touch that we have come to expect from Seattle. And then if you're not getting that from the quarterback position and you're continuing to struggle running the football, especially when you don't have very many opportunities to run the football, then your offense is going to sputter. And so it's just one of the unfortunate realities is as the Seattle's defense has gotten better, it felt like Seattle's offense would start to pick up some of the slack, and that has not been the case at all, regardless of who's been playing quarterback.
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think even in the season opener, especially when you consider the third quarter, how poorly the Seahawks played on offense, they were great in the first half against the Colts, but they didn't have great numbers on third down in that game. Even before Russell Wilson's injury, they were towards the bottom of the league in third down conversion rate. For the season, Russell Wilson has completed 35% of his passes on third down. I believe that is the worst mark among qualified passers in the NFL. So he has been arguably the worst passer on third down in the entire league. And so Geno Smith, maybe a little bit more productive. He was more accurate from a completion percentage standpoint. His numbers obviously spiked with that win over the Jaguars, a big game for the Seahawks. But I don't think there's been a huge difference just based on watching the film. And I think the numbers would bear that out. We may bring those numbers back on the show at some point just to clarify, but I don't think that there was a huge difference there. And to me, that's actually pretty disheartening. If your backup quarterback is putting up similar, if not better numbers in accuracy than what your starter is, and that's including the games before Russell Wilson got hurt. So as things stand, I really don't think there has been that big of a difference in that particular perspective. That does not mean Geno Smith is as good as Russell Wilson, but the last two games, Russell Wilson hasn't looked any better than what Geno Smith's going to offer you. Maybe that changes in the next week or so as Wilson keeps getting healthier, back in the rhythm, but it's probably going to be too little, too late. Next question from Mitchell tweets, who will step up and tell the offense to take whatever the defense is willing to give you? Lockett seems to get it, but we keep getting what-ifs from Russell Wilson on missed plays after the game is already lost. This is a fitting question because Lockett last night again mentioned that opponents aren't running the same defenses and coverages that they are game planning for based on how they've seen them attack other teams, other opponents, and they're not adjusting quick enough. This is not the first time that Tyler Lockett has said this. Pete Carroll today told me when I asked him about that, you know, that's assuming that he's right. He basically said my player's not right there, and we didn't have any issues, no surprises yesterday. But I do find it interesting that Lockett has now said this a couple different times, and I think he's a pretty smart football player with a high football IQ. For him to say this, I think it matters more than a lot of people are realizing.
I 100% agree. I think that this is giving us a peek behind the curtain as to what's going on with the Seahawks locker room. I think that Tyler Lockett is an exceptionally smart football player. I also think that he's incredibly honest, just human being. You know, his intangibles are one of the most remarkable things about him. So yeah, the fact that Tyler Lockett is basically calling out the offense, and whether that be the quarterback, whether that be the offensive coordinator, whether that be himself or the other pass catchers around him, I think it's a pretty damning comment that the Seahawks are unable to basically make adjustments, because it shouldn't matter what the Seahawks are seeing on tape from their opponents, whether it be man coverage, zone coverage, whether it be switching it up. If the Seahawks should be able to be self-scouting themselves and saying, okay, if we are seeing an unexpected defense, then how are we going to adjust? And the Seahawks' inability to be able to make those, you know, halftime adjustments, certainly, but even during the game, during the drive, pre-snap audibles, things like that. The fact that Seattle has struggled so much, you know, offensively, and you continue to see other defense or other offenses, even with backup quarterbacks, be able to move in rhythm. That there's been nothing about the Seahawks offense virtually all season long that is even close to the word rhythm.
No, there hasn't been. It's been extremely difficult to watch the last couple of weeks in particular. I mean, when you have 20 consecutive drives without a touchdown, and you have Russell Wilson, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, Gerald Everett, the weapons the Seahawks have, it's just inexcusable that your offense would be that inept and unable to move the ball, unable to score points. And that's why when Pete Carroll today said, no, this isn't an issue, you know, we're used to this. Teams are always playing us different, so we adjust. Well, that has not played out, at least the last couple seasons. Lockett said last year, and we know how the second half played out, that this was going on the second half of the season. And I can't tell you how many times Tyler Lockett has mentioned we got to get better at taking what the defense gives us. A lot of that falls on Russell Wilson's plate. Defenses are giving you those check downs. You got to get the football to your receivers. You got to be quick getting the ball out. You could say maybe the play caller isn't helping with that either. That certainly could be the case, but I think that falls on Russell Wilson's plate. So this is it's kind of like the offense where it's been in disarray and they haven't been necessarily able to line things up. You're seeing that with Russell Wilson disagreeing on defenses doing things differently. Pete Carroll not necessarily having any answers. Tyler Lockett, I'm the only guy on the team that seems to have an answer, and I've said this a couple times. Just seems like everybody's just kind of at odds against each other here in this particular case, and that's why you've got a broken offense for the Seahawks. That's called dysfunction, at least the way that I view it. After School Kizania tweets, should the Seahawks consider making a change at left tackle? Real quick, Rob, do you think that that's something the Seahawks should consider doing with Dwayne Brown, for the most part, struggling? I thought he played fairly well yesterday, but he's banged up. He's had his issues this year. You're not going to the playoffs, most likely. Is it time to make a change there?
I think it's time to consider it, but I also think it's time to consider changing the quarterback position. And I'm not the only one that said that. I mean, as you mentioned before, Corbin, that, you're in the press box. I'm watching from the comfy confines of my home. And I can tell you that Terry Bradshaw and Jimmy Johnson, as part of the Fox telecast at halftime show, they both were basically calling for the Seahawks to check out the backup quarterback. Didn't even mention Geno Smith by name. And I'm not sure that either one of them even know who the Seattle's backup quarterback is. They just wanted the backup quarterback because we're seeing Russell Wilson basically throwing worm burners with wide open receivers near the red zone, and so that's, to me, is the much, much bigger question. Sure, Dwayne Brown is aging. He has struggled a little bit with inconsistency so far this season. I'm not so sure you're going to get much better play from Jamarco Jones. And I don't know that it's going to make much of an impact in terms of wins and losses. And I think it would make one hell of a statement to the rest of your team if you bench Russell Wilson and say, all right, Geno Smith, let's see what you got, because you have been playing better. Wilson has been abysmal the last 2 weeks, Corbin, and I don't know if there's any other way of sugarcoating it. I think that these losses the last 2 weeks are as much on his shoulders as any victories the Seahawks have had with Russell Wilson at the helm in the past.
Yeah, I'm not going to go to that point. Now, if he's not healthy, if that's what's going on here, then yeah, maybe you consider we're not going to the playoffs. We don't want to get our number one asset here banged up. Maybe they would consider resting him at that point. Russell Wilson would push back against that, being the competitor that he is. But I don't see a move happening at left tackle right now. Now, they lose a few more games, then I think you got to go in full developmental mode for the guys that you expect that are going to be back next year. Let Stone Forsythe and Jake Kieran on the right side, for that matter, let them go through their lumps right now, playing in games that aren't going to be meaningful to getting to the playoffs, but they're going to be meaningful for those players' development. Some of your young corners, your young defensive linemen, young pass catchers, D. Eskridge, get him involved. Maybe Penny Hart. I mean, try to get younger players that are going to be on the roster next year. Try to get them opportunities to develop. To me, that is an argument that you can make here if they lose another game or two, that they really need to switch up their priorities for how they're going to be playing certain players. Now, guys like DK Metcalf, you're going to keep playing now because he's young and he's very talented and he's got areas to grow in his game. But some of your aging vets that aren't under contract after this year, like a Dwayne Brown, that is the type of situation where you might want to consider, let's go young. We're not going anywhere. Let's try to develop somebody so that next year, maybe somebody like Stone Forsythe can jump in and be ready to go as a starter in 2022. And if he doesn't play well, you have your answers there. We can go out and get another tackle during free agency or in the draft, and let's start over at that position. Or maybe that means we can bring Dwayne Brown back next year. But you don't know that till you've seen what these guys can do on the field. So I think that's why you can make that argument here in a few weeks. I don't know they're quite to that point, even though I think the playoffs are an absolute long shot at this point. They'd have to pretty much win out to get there. They're still not mathematically eliminated. Pete Carroll and company aren't going to give up yet in that particular regard. So I don't expect them to make that move. Coming up next in the third quarter, we're going to take one last look, and I promise you it will be the last look that we have at Sunday's game. It was that ugly. Seahawks losing to an undermanned Cardinals squad, dropping their 7th game of the season, and we aren't even done with the month of November. We're going to look at the good. There are a few positives, believe me. It's rare to find them in a game like this, but we're going to look at the good and the bad coming out of Sunday's loss at Lumen Field. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you haven't tried a Built Bar by now, you are missing out. They say it's a protein bar, but it does not taste like one. You have to try one of these amazing bars for yourself to truly believe it. Most protein bars are chalky or waxy. A Built Bar, though, is soft, covered in 100% real chocolate, and when you bite into it, you know you're eating something different. It's more of an experience, one that you'll enjoy. In fact, you swear you're eating a candy bar. Built Bars are low carb, low fat, low calorie, low sugar, and high in protein. All the healthy benefits on top of just being purely delicious. So many amazing flavors. Another great thing about Built Bar, they've got all these mouth-watering flavors to choose from, such as double chocolate, salted caramel, mint brownie, my personal favorite, peanut butter brownie. This month, Built is coming out with new limited time flavors every 3 to 4 days. So go check out their website often. You don't want to miss out. Go to Built.com and use the promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. That's LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com.
BetOnline is back and better than ever. A new web interface for the start of the basketball season and more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is and remains your number one spot for all the basketball and football action this season. Head to their new updated desktop or mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code LOCKEDON to receive your bonus. From basketball, football, NHL, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games, don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet all your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Monday edition. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Joining me as always, Rob Rang. The Seahawks entered this weekend with a pretty desperate situation. They were 3-6, 3 games under 500, in last place in the NFC West, all by themselves. But they were gifted with a great opportunity because the Cardinals were coming to Seattle without starting quarterback Kyler Murray and all-pro receiver DeAndre Hopkins. They're 2 top offensive playmakers, even with the Cardinals coming in at 8-2. That gave a major advantage to the Seahawks with Russell Wilson back under center, a far healthier team overall than what the Cardinals were playing at home. This seemed like a great chance for Seattle to right the ship a little bit, get a big win within the division, and be right in the thick of things in the NFC West playoff race for one of those last couple wildcard spots. But ultimately, Rob, this was a game where the Cardinals, with Colt McCoy at quarterback, they looked like the 3-6 team that badly needed a win just to keep their playoff hopes alive. They were the team that played with urgency and effort and grit. You just didn't see very much of that from a lifeless Seahawks squad. And that's why they're 3-7. That's why they're in last place in the NFC West. When you have an opportunity like this and then you come out as flat as they did, particularly on offense, you don't deserve to win games in the NFL. And it doesn't matter what the rosters look like. The game's still got to be played between the lines. And the Seahawks, quite frankly, acted like a team that was disinterested and thought they already had the win when kickoff came.
Yeah, I wonder if that might be the case. I mean, again, Kyler Murray is a fantastic player. DeAndre Hopkins, the fact that neither of those 2 players were playing, it maybe Seattle did feel a little overconfident that they would be able to win this game at home. I don't know that it was an effort thing, but there is no question about it. Arizona played faster. They played smarter. It just looked like a whole different level. It was varsity versus JV. It's too much of that football game. I mean, Seattle lost by 10 points and, they were gifted, another, 8, 9 points because of the Arizona's kicker just having one of the most horrific, games of his entire NFL career. And Prater's a pretty good kicker. So I was kind of stunned by the result of this game. I mean, I sound a little bit like Pete Carroll. Like it doesn't even register in my mind how poorly the Seahawks played. I mean, it wasn't just on the offense. We've been kind of knocking how poorly Seattle played on offense. On defense, Seattle's inability to make any kind of third down stops to me was one of the real disheartening aspects of this game. For the Arizona Cardinals, basically in their very first drive, to just kind of nickel and dime their way all the way down the field. Colt McCoy looked like an absolute superstar. I mean, if you had switched jerseys, you would have thought that was a healthy Russell Wilson out there with the way that he was able to slip by would-be pass rushers, that he was able to find, receivers open all day long. I mean, just it was a remarkable performance by the Arizona Cardinals. Frankly, I found myself kind of, almost switching sides and saying, hey, I like the way the Cardinals are playing, and the Seahawks are playing so bad. As we had some questions in the second quarter, like, how do you cope? I mean, it was difficult to watch from a Seahawks perspective. It was exquisite football on the Arizona Cardinals side, on the other side of the ball.
It was. You got to give Cliff Kingsbury a lot of credit for having his team ready to go, having a great game plan that really attacked the Seahawks. I mean, the Seahawks were perfectly content with them going with those underneath passes, and they couldn't stop them. They didn't make adjustments. And Colt McCoy, when he had to, he was able to make some big throws. The Cardinals had 7 explosive plays in this game. McCoy had 328 passing yards. He completed 35 out of 44 passes. I mean, he looked, you mentioned, him being out there looking like Russell Wilson. I thought he looked like Aaron Rodgers in this game. The way that he was getting the ball out of his hands quickly and extending plays with his legs, looking to throw. And then I thought Kyler Murray put on his jersey in the fourth quarter. I mean, they had Colt McCoy running read options and QB draws, and he was picking up good yardage, looked really spry for a 35-year-old quarterback. So it was an embarrassing performance. There's no other way you can put it. This is a defense for Seattle that had played so well the last 3 or 4 games. And for them to come out and let the Cardinals march 16 plays on almost 10 minutes of game clock, convert 4 third downs. They get a 5th one where a penalty on Tre Brown, a pass interference penalty at the 2-yard line, gives the Cardinals 1st and goal. So, I mean, they basically went 5 for 5 on 3rd down on that drive. You can't do that, especially against a team that's playing a backup quarterback. And they made him look like MVP version of Aaron Rodgers in this game. So that's extremely disappointing. That was a big reason why the Cardinals had the ball almost 20 minutes more than what the Seahawks did, is they had 3 scoring drives that were 10-plus minutes in this game. And there could have been 4 if not for a Prater missed field goal. I mean, that's a lot of time that got chewed up. I said 10 minutes. It was 3 drives with 10-plus plays. But still the same point. Sustained drives that the Cardinals were able to put together, and the Seahawks just weren't able to get off the field. And compounding that issue, their offense couldn't stay on the field. And it was really a new day and the same problems. 2 for 10 on 3rd down. Russell Wilson 0 for 5 passing the football on 3rd down. The run game was effective, but they only had 18 carries. Carroll lamented that again today. Oh, we weren't able to run the ball as much as we want to. He's been saying that for almost a year and a half. And they keep not hitting their goals as far as how many carries they want to have, in part because their drives just aren't being sustained. They had 30 less plays in this game than what the Arizona Cardinals did. Wilson, had a better game than last week, but that's not saying too much. Still no touchdowns. Could have thrown a pick 6 that got dropped by one of the Cardinals linebackers in the 3rd quarter. It just was a game with a lot of questionable decision-making, poor red zone efficiency, which has not been Seattle's problem this year. That was a new issue on top of everything else that they've been dealing with, not holding onto the football, not converting on 3rd down. And so it's been ugly, and they don't seem to have an answer, hence why Pete Carroll barged out of his press conference yesterday, something I had never seen Pete Carroll do. To his credit, he came back in and he finished answering questions with reporters after a couple of players had their turn to the podium. But there's clear frustration because at this point, it's obvious Pete Carroll doesn't know what the answer is to these problems. When you have the same issues for 7 or 8 games, it really starts to wear on you. The most challenging time in his career. Your offense can't move the ball. You can't put points up on the board. Your defense is giving up these long, methodical drives, allowing the quarterback on the other side to complete 80+% of his passes. When you do that, you're very rarely going to win games. That's just the reality.
Yeah, it is. And what I thought made it that much more difficult is it just felt like the Cardinals were just kind of toying, like cat and mouse, just kind of toying with the Seahawks. Like,
Yep.
oh, okay, you brought in Jamal Adams. We're going to make a trade for a tight end in Zach Ertz, and he's going to score multiple touchdowns against you, and then could have had a third one, of course, if not for Jamal Adams holding him in the end zone. That led to James Conner's, the go or the breakaway kind of score that made the game, really out of Seattle's, striking distance. As you mentioned, the 18, I think it was 19 rushes that the Seahawks had in this game, including a couple of Russell Wilson runs. Only 7 of them were after halftime. And this was still a close game in large part because Matt Prater was missing as many kicks. And so the Cardinals were the ones that were chewing up the clock. I mean, basically doing exactly what Pete Carroll had always preached that he wanted the Seahawks to do. The Cardinals showed off their flashy new rookie Rondale Moore, who was absolutely dynamic in this game. There was, time after time that he should have been tackled for a 2 or 3 yard loss or 2 or 3 yards at most gain. And one time Jamal Adams made a pretty splashy play near the goal line that I thought was one of the most exciting plays from the entire game from a Seattle perspective. And yet it still was a gain by Arizona. But there were other times where Rondale Moore made just about everybody on Seattle's defense miss, where meanwhile, D. Eskridge, of course, is on the sideline until the very, very end of the game. Colby Parkinson, another one who has been bandied about as being a guy that might be a game breaker for the Seahawks this season. I think he had like one catch. I mean, he got into the third quarter for one token play. It feels like Seattle is kind of checking off box, like, okay, let's get this guy onto the field just so we can say we got him onto the field. Whereas the Arizona Cardinals, they felt like they actually were game planning. As Tyler Lockett kind of mentioned in one of his comments, it almost felt like the Cardinals and some of the other teams that Seattle is playing have played so far this year are playing chess. And the Seahawks, I'm not even sure can figure out checkers at this point.
That's a really good analogy because that's what it feels like. And just looking at the personnel usage, again, I tweeted about this yesterday. One team, the Cardinals, has a day 2 second round pick that is getting the football frequently, and he's making Seahawk defenders twist themselves into pretzels every time that he's got the ball. And the other team's got a second-round wide receiver that has been standing on the sidelines almost the entire game. It doesn't add up. It's just another really bad look for the Seahawks. I mean, we could keep hammering home all these negatives. When you lose by 10 points to a team at home that doesn't have its starting quarterback, doesn't have its best receiver, was missing a few guys on defense. I mean, the Cardinals, they had every reason to pack it in going to this game, especially considering they have a bye coming up this next weekend. They could have easily packed it in, but Cliff Kingsbury's team came to play. Again, they looked like the group that was 3-6, that badly needed to win just to stay in the playoff race. The Seahawks looked like they were the team, we're 8-2, we got a bye week coming up, and just did not play with the grit and the competitive nature that you expect from a Pete Carroll coach team. It just doesn't seem like the message, whatever Carroll and his staff are trying to give to these players, it just doesn't seem like it is working this year for whatever reason. They're not buying into it. It's not impacting how things are playing out in the field for the better. And so it's really difficult to watch. I do want to end with a few positives because, as Pete Carroll pointed out, they didn't have any turnovers on offense, only 2 penalties the entire game. Those are pluses. And I thought a few guys on defense played really well. Brian Monet with a 1.5 sack a game. He had half a sack his entire career going into this game. And the big fella was able to get after Colt McCoy a couple times. One of them used a really nice rip move to discard a blocker. And then the other play, he threw Rodney Hudson like a bag of grain over to the side and then was able to get Colt McCoy as he stepped up into the pocket. So he had a good game. Sidney Jones should have had his first interception. I guess you could say that was a bad thing, is that I don't understand why that was overturned. It did not look conclusive evidence-wise to me. That was not an interception, but had 12 tackles, a career high, 10 receiving yards given up on 3 receptions. One of them was a touchdown, but I thought Sidney Jones played really well. I thought Brian Monet played really well. So there were some bright spots on defense. The pass protection held up better than expected after the first drive. That was awful, giving up 2 sacks real quick. But I thought the pass pro was better than expected, given the talent the Cardinals have rushing off the edge. Those were really the main positives that jumped out. Aside from that, you're really grasping for straws, looking for things to be optimistic about.
No, I agree. I was encouraged by the play of Joe Everett, but that's somebody I've been encouraged by his play now for a long time. Going back to training camp. I mean, he was the offseason addition I was most excited about. I think that he continues to play like a beast out there. I mean, it's very rare you see him go down to the first defender. And so I was encouraged by that. I was encouraged by just the savvy play. They continue to play hard mentality that is Tyler Lockett. And so I'll give Russell Wilson a little bit of credit for that. The one throw deep down the right sideline that, kind of led to DJ Dallas's touchdown. I thought DJ Dallas played fairly well also. So there were some bright spots out there, on the offensive side of the ball. I thought on the defensive side of the ball, I thought that Seattle's pass rush was interesting, that they got pressure. They just didn't get home often enough. And that's what really surprised me is how well the Colt McCoy was able to just kind of slip and slide his way through pressure, and almost like he knew exactly where it was coming at all times and would just be able to kind of, slip by and then just dump off little passes. Or, as to your point before about the 7 explosive plays that the Cardinals generated as well, that they were able to create some explosive plays. It was not just the flick the ball up in the air and hope, even though with a guy like AJ Green over Seattle's diminutive cornerbacks, that they had huge advantages in that way. I thought that Arizona just severely outplayed Seattle. And that would be the one last player. You mentioned Sidney Jones. To be pressed into the action the way that he was, it wasn't just the coverage. It wasn't just some of the tackles. He had one particular tackle in James Conner, and James Conner is a big physical back, and Sidney Jones has never been known as being a real big physical tackler, but he pulled him down by his arm, and that was an impressive tackle. If Sidney Jones continues to play like that, Seattle may not have quite the drop-off at cornerback that you might expect, considering the horrible news that we talked about previously with Trey going down to a very serious knee injury.
Yeah, I was impressed with the physicality and the aggressiveness, especially the second half of this game. It just kind of seemed like a light switch came on for Sidney Jones. And obviously Tyler Lockett, 14th career 100-yard game. He was one of the rare bright spots. I thought Damian Lewis up front had his best game of the season. No pressures allowed, opened up some really nice running lanes for Alex Collins. The big run Rashad Penny had to start the game, that happened solely because of a kick down block that was made by Damian Lewis. So I thought that he answered the call after a really bad game in Green Bay. It played well. So there were some bright spots, but at the end of the day, there were too many negatives. There were too many mistakes made, too many of the same problems on both sides of the ball that have derailed this football team, and they just can't find solutions to these problems. And that's a mark of a bad football team. When you can't fix issues like converting third downs, stopping opponents on third downs, finding a way to create some turnovers, missed opportunities that lead to negative plays, too many third and longs, you name it. All of those are issues that have bothered the Seahawks and hindered them all year long, and yet they just can't find an answer to them. And so it's basically where they're at right now. You find answers. Maybe you can go on a little bit of a run. There's still time to try to approach the 500 mark. If you can get hot, you have a fairly easy schedule coming up. But again, you just lost to a team with a backup quarterback and missing their number one receiver. So none of these games are guaranteed. The Seahawks are going to have to find a way to pull things together, stay together, and maybe they can get hot. I think at this point, these were two games they could not afford to lose both of them in Green Bay and against Arizona. And unfortunately, they came up short yesterday with a 3-7 record. It feels like the playoffs are pretty much out of the question now at this point for Pete Carroll's squad. Thanks for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen every day. Now make sure to make Locked On Bets your daily one-stop shop for all your gambling needs. Your second listen, Locked On Bets, is hosted by your boy Q with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. You can follow me on Twitter at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to check out Locked On Seahawks on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and the all-new Odyssey app. That's AUDACY. When we return for our Tuesday show, we're going to start breaking down a Week 11 matchup against the Washington football team, a surging Washington football team. The Seahawks will be facing them on Monday Night Football. Plus, we're going to be taking a look at 4 members of Seattle's Brain Trust. Which one of them has the best job security and which one might be on the hottest of seats, given Seattle's really poor start to the 2021 season. We hope you'll be listening in. Enjoy the rest of your Monday. Go Hawks.